Esto es Colombia 4.0. Ya haces parte de la era de la inteligencia artificial. Ponte cómodo y disfruta de todo lo que hemos preparado para ti.
Antes de darle la bienvenida a nuestro invitado, queremos pedirle el favor de que se acerquen un poco para no dejar tantos espacios entre sillas. Entonces, si se pueden acercar, les agradeceríamos mucho. Y por favor, recibamos con un fuerte aplauso a Satwik Seshasai de Atria Health.
Hello, hello. So it's 4 p.m., late in the afternoon. Hopefully people is everyone still awake? Is everyone ready? Okay. My name is Satwik Seshasai. I come from the US. This is my first time in Colombia, so I thank you all for the very warm welcome. I've enjoyed my week here, and I'm very excited to speak with all of you about a topic that's very special to me, which is artificial intelligence, and the importance of understanding how to use artificial intelligence for economic growth and economic impact. Before I start, I want to get an idea who's in the room here. How many of you are technical? You're an engineer, you're working in a software company. How many of you are from you're an entrepreneur, you have your own company, you're a founder? All right. How many people here are from the government or the nonprofit sector? All right, good. So we have a mix of people here, which is good, because the stories I want to tell you are all stories that I think apply to all of those different audiences. I hope that when you listen to these stories, there's something that each one of you can take from what I'm about to describe. And so what I'd like to do is really talk about how generative AI, what we've been hearing a lot about this week, can actually generate economic opportunity. Now, we know that the years leading up to the last couple of years have been really focused on predictive AI, and I think it's important to distinguish between the two. Predictive AI is about using data to predict what might happen in the future, whereas generative AI, as we heard in the opening keynote, is about using artificial intelligence to generate new information, to generate new concepts, new content, and new opportunities. And so there's been a lot of advancement in the last year around generative AI, but many of the signals of how generative AI can drive economic opportunity have actually been there for many years leading up to this. This isn't actually as new as people say that it is. And so what I'd like to do is walk you through some stories from the past years and help explain that. And so when we think about how to use AI to drive economic opportunity, there's three things I want you to listen for as I tell the stories. Number one, how AI can help generate more value from assets that you have. Now, an asset could be your home, an asset could be your talent, an asset could be natural resources, but whatever it is, how can AI generate more value than what you already have. Number two, AI can identify opportunities to deploy capital. When we think about the movement of capital, some of you are entrepreneurs here, you might have investors and you've asked for capital from them. When you think about how those deployment decisions are made, they're often done because you ask for it. You think, I need money for my business, you ask, and then they deploy money. I want you to hear through these stories about opportunities where AI can actually identify those opportunities even before we understand that those opportunities exist. And finally, AI can transform constraints, things that we take as limitations or blockers, and turn them into economic drivers, turn them into opportunities to actually drive forward, as opposed to just looking at those constraints as things we should be trying to mitigate. So here's my story. I've been very fortunate in my career to be the chief technology officer of a number of amazing companies. I've had amazing colleagues, I've had amazing customers and partners, and I've gotten to see so many different parts of the world and so many different parts of our society. And in each one of these, I've had the opportunity to see artificial intelligence generate opportunities. As I said before, most of the artificial intelligence in the last 20 years has been focused on predictive and descriptive AI. Predictive, we talked about. Descriptive means looking at AI as a way to understand a data set and tell you what's actually there. But many of the practices that we used also lay the groundwork for how now we have an opportunity to use generative AI going forward to generate opportunities. And so I'll tell you about my time at each one of these companies. Hopefully each one of these stories will have at least something that grabs you and is interesting to you. I'm going to talk about NextDocs, a company in the life sciences space. Segovia is a company I helped start in the global payment space. Spring was a company I joined that was focused on fashion and beauty e-commerce. Compass is a company that became the largest real estate brokerage in the United States. Clearco is a company that provided financing to small and medium businesses started by entrepreneurs, focusing on those from diverse backgrounds and underrepresented parts of the world. And then finally, I'm currently at a company called Atria, which is focused on healthcare, specifically preventative healthcare. And then all of these stories of mine actually led me earlier this year to join the board of an organization, a fantastic organization called Building Markets. Building Markets is a global organization with an incredibly active presence here in Colombia. We have our team sitting over here. And I've been very fortunate to get to know the team and to get to know the opportunities that they've identified. And I hope that what you'll see is that a lot of the lessons from all of these companies will actually translate into what we can do here in Colombia, Latin America, even beyond in the world, to actually drive the economy in a variety of different dimensions. So let's start with NextDocs. NextDocs, let me tell you the story about this company. In the US and in Europe, which were the two continents, the two areas that we were focused on, when you need to bring a new medicine to market, you need to run a set of trials, and then those trials test that the medicine is actually going to work, and then you produce paperwork, and you submit it to the government, and the government responds with whether they think it's okay, whether they think there's additional things you have to focus on. And then you go back and forth a couple times, and then you get the drug into market. It often takes many, many years to do this. And one of the things we saw is that part of the reason it takes so many years is because of all of the processes you see on the board here. You had to go through clinical processes, but then you also had to go through the document management I described. You had to create standard operating procedures and quality guidelines for how to administer the drug. And then you had to go through and understand, how are you going to deal with complaints? How are you going to do change control if you learn something new? So many different processes that each had their own step, and that limited the speed at which those drugs could get to market. And so the approach we took is that when we looked at the core data in this world was the medical results coming from the testing of those drugs with patients who had the conditions that the drugs were looking to treat, and also patients who did not have those conditions. And through those experiments, data was being collected. The data was not just about whether the drug was working or not, but also included demographic information, also included the dosing of the medicine, and so on and so forth. That was the important work. Everything else, the document management, the preparation of the content, and so forth, was actually work that we could automate, that we could use artificial intelligence to actually take that data and compile all the paperwork necessary for the government to be able to read the information in the way that they wanted to and approve the drug to market. Now, that doesn't sound like AI. That probably sounds like classic computer-based automation. Part of the artificial intelligence was actually understanding when results were positive or negative, what type of language to use to describe the results. Also understanding what types of content from the different processes you see here were relevant based on the results we were seeing. One of the other challenges, because of the amount of paperwork required, is that doctors were not able to collaborate as much as they wanted to in building the right protocols for administering the new medicine. And so we were able to save a tremendous amount of time, but also completely change the process into one that operated in much more real time. In other words, as the new drugs were being tested, results were coming in, paperwork was being produced and sent to the government, but also new trials were being generated on an automated basis. We were not waiting for the feedback because we could predict what the feedback was going to be. And so this was a great example of how we took a constraint, which was the process-based constraint of creating documents and paperwork, and instead, we kind of flipped the process and said, let us actually use the automation that we've built to create these documents and manage these processes. Let's use those to actually create new trials and not only speed up the process to market, but actually understand maybe even new uses of those same medicines. So that's my first story. And now we're going to go to a different industry. We're going to go to payments. So I was very fortunate to join a couple economists who had been focused on what's known as development economics, meaning the study of how economics within a developing nation can be used to understand how to create growth. These two individuals, Michael Fay and Paul Niehaus, had a viewpoint that one of the greatest barriers to growth within a number of developing nations was the ability to actually be able to facilitate payments, something that we in the US, those in Europe, those in even here in Colombia take for granted. If I want to send you money, I can go on my phone, I can click a couple buttons, I can send you money. Even before the phone, if I wanted to send you money, I could just transfer it to your bank. This is not possible in many parts of the world. Billions of people are disconnected from the financial ecosystem. And so the way we thought about this was mobile money, meaning the ability to have money that is tied to your phone account, is something that's possible even if you don't have a bank account. Even if you don't have a bank account, you have a phone. If you have a phone, it doesn't have to be a smartphone, you have money on that phone's account. And so what we contemplated was, how can we take the banking system that exists and connect it to the mobile accounts of the individuals with whom we wanted to connect into the financial ecosystem. Now again, this sounds like a classic engineering problem. It's unclear perhaps where artificial intelligence comes in, but let me tell you, a number of the different reasons why the regulations in many parts of the world did not allow payments into sub-Saharan Africa where we were focused is because of the risk associated with it. They were concerned about whether the money was actually getting into the right person's hands. They were concerned about whether we knew who that person was. They were concerned about whether, if money started to move out of one account, whether it actually entered the target account or whether there would be a gap. And so for all of these reasons, when we looked at actually creating the APIs or application program interfaces, such as the one you see here, to be able to use software to exchange money, we actually created a data set that we had to apply artificial intelligence on to be able to start to assess some of the things I described. We could use that to start to understand payments are going over here, that's a new behavior, is that a risk we need to investigate? We could also use that to understand payments have been sent over here. Usually when payments are sent over here, a certain percentage of them tend not to work. This is an opportunity to create mitigation plans for those payments, perhaps put those payments into an escrow account before the money actually transfers. And so there were a number of things that we did that were all oriented around creating reliability of those payment flows through using artificial intelligence to think very intelligently about whether a transaction was likely to occur and to mitigate the risks of whether it could occur or not. And so then what that enabled is that through a variety of different scenarios, what you see on the left here is one that's focused on international development, where aid programs that tend to provide cash assistance to beneficiaries in these parts of the world have to go through a step-by-step process of identifying who the individual is, enrolling them in a program, verifying that they are who they say they are, transferring the funds, and then monitoring the use of those funds. Those were all elements of a program that had at its core a payments capability, but had much more associated with it. It turned out that because we were using AI to actually facilitate the payment, we could actually automate a number of these steps. We understood who the person was. We understood more about the person than you would if you just interviewed the person, because we knew what the nature of their transactions were, we knew who they interacted with, and so on and so forth. And so what ended up happening here is that because of the AI that we introduced into this ecosystem, we were actually able to identify new opportunities to deploy capital. One of my favorite examples is when we worked with some of the largest global coffee producers in the world, and we connected them with the smallholder farmers who were using their hectares of land to grow coffee beans. And we provided them with an opportunity to deploy even more capital, to grow even more, because we were able to demonstrate a reliable supply chain. And so we actually took the constraint of them not being able to do the payment and therefore not being able to actually manage the supply chain with these smallholders, and we turned it into an opportunity where they could actually, in a very dynamic fashion, match the amount of supply that they were getting with the demand that they had in their parts of the world. This also had the effect of increasing the value of the crops that were in these individuals' fields. So those crops, because they were now, through the payment ecosystem, connected to the broader supply and demand ecosystem of the world, were able to have greater value because they were matched with the optimal demand for their crop. And so I hope you see here an example of how the AI application actually had much greater effects than simply the automation, but actually had an effect on the economic conditions of the environment that we were working in. All right. So I have 6 stories. We're now at number 3, so we're almost at the halfway point. I'm going to tell you about spring. So how many of you like to buy clothes online? How many of you like to try them on and actually know that it fits and know that it works before you buy the clothes? So one of the things that we had some consideration on at spring was how can we create a world where the same flexibility and speed at which you select other products online, you know, when you buy toys for your kids or when you buy supplies for your house, how can we take all of those capabilities and bring them to the fashion and beauty marketplace, which is not a category of product that as directly lends itself to e-commerce. And so there were a number of different challenges here. One of them is that typically when you go online to a certain retailer's website, you're either seeing the clothes that they've produced, or if it is a retailer who is pulling in brands from multiple sources, you often have a human who has made decisions on what products to build in. In the US, we call that merchandising. So that team will think about, well, it's the summer season, we want to be modern, we want to be forward-thinking, we're going to bring in these colors and these styles and these designers. And then your only opportunity to buy is scoped to the clothes that are available specifically for that company, that retailer. And so that what I just described is actually a constraint of the in-person brick and mortar shopping experience. If you go into a store, you can only buy what's in the store. And so we started to think, how can we create an opportunity? Not just take what's in the store and put it online, but actually make something possible online that is impossible in the store. So that some of you who raised your hand and said, I'll only buy my clothes in the store, will now think about, maybe there's a better opportunity for me to buy the clothes online. And so what we did is we went to a number of clothing and jewelry and cosmetics providers, and we said to them, we want to aggregate all of your products. We don't want to think about which product is going to be the best one to sell to whom and when. We just want everything. And they said, well, that sounds like a tremendous amount of work. And so we said, well, hold on a second. If you give us permission to do that, we'll do all the work. We'll take on the burden of doing it. And so we got 1,500 clothing suppliers, fashion and beauty suppliers, to agree to send their products to us. That represented about 4.3 million product SKUs that were available on our site. And if you think about a piece of clothing, think about the shirt I'm wearing now. Think about all the attributes. It has a style, of course. It has someone who produced it. But it also has a color. It has a size. It might have, this same shirt might be available as a long sleeve or short sleeve. And so for every product, you have to understand all the attributes of that product. You also need to understand the pricing. And sometimes you might find, hopefully you like the color I picked, this purple color. This might be more expensive because it's a better looking color. There might be other colors that are less popular that are less expensive. And so you have to consider that. You also have to consider inventory. You have to know if someone wants to buy that shirt, is it going to come tomorrow or next week? Or is it back-ordered and maybe they'll have to wait a long time or they can't get it anymore? So all of this information is critical. And the companies that manage these clothes, they don't have these data sets just available to give out. And so what we had to do was we had to use artificial intelligence to actually go to those companies' websites and actually pull down the product data, all the data that I just described. We then had to use artificial intelligence to determine what are the actual attributes of that product, what is the taxonomy, meaning what category of product and what style, and then take the images. Now, one of the things, if you're buying clothes online, is that the images are critical. You would never buy this shirt just hearing it's a lavender shirt. You would only buy it if you could see it. And so we had to take the imaging data and properly map it to the appropriate areas of the site. So when someone clicked on show me the blue one, we would show them the blue one. Now this sounds easy because with our eyes, any human can do it very easily. But if I ask you to do it for 4.3 million products, and if I tell you that all 4.3 million of those products had to be updated every 15 minutes, because we had to know, had it sold? We had to know, had the price changed? We had to know whether a new style came out every 15 minutes, so we were staying up to date. You would tell me there's no way humans can do that. And so we used, you see a little bit of a description here, artificial intelligence to take those images and that data and properly categorize them. And what that resulted in was the experience you see here, where now, when someone came to our site, they were not constrained by what some merchandising team had decided that they might be interested in. They could look at the entire universe of products and make a decision for themselves. And so in this case, we actually generated more value per product. If you think about a company that has a certain style of shirt, maybe there's some people they don't even realize would be interested in that shirt, but because they're only selling it through specific stores, they don't even know that this buyer is over here. But because we put everything on the same site, we made it possible to make those connections happen. We also took this entire data set and started to federate it, meaning send it from a program or software perspective to other marketplaces, specifically for us in China because of the large volume of demand that exists there. And we made it possible for those individuals in China, using marketplaces like JD and Alibaba, to be able to buy all of these products that are typically only available in the US. And so what we took was a constraint that existed in the market around needing to merchandise, and we actually completely flipped it on its head. And we said, we're now using AI to do the aggregation of product, and based on that, we're actually going to use the AI to help you decide what you want. And so we turned that constraint into an opportunity, into a sales opportunity that created economic opportunity for all those producers of those clothes, and also created value for all of those individuals who were buying those clothes. And now we talk about Compass. How many people here own their own home? And how many people here have been involved in either deciding where you're going to rent your home or apartment or flat, and have done that on 2 or 3 times, and have seen it, have seen the process, have seen all the things you have to think about when you're deciding where to live. And maybe you have a spouse or partner, maybe you have kids, and now you have to manage all of the different interests and needs of all of those different parties when deciding where to live. So at Compass, we built a technology platform that allowed real estate agents. So in the US, it's very typical when you're looking to buy a home that you connect with a real estate agent and they go find homes for you to buy. Or when you want to sell your home, you find an agent and they market your home and find buyers for your home. We created tools so that when those agents were working with buyers and sellers, they could operate as efficiently as possible and make sure that they were providing the best opportunity to the buyers and sellers of homes that they were working with. And so on both sides of that marketplace, we leveraged artificial intelligence to create opportunity. On the buy side, you see here what we called Compass Lens. Compass Lens was an ability, when you look at the photos of a home, to imagine what it would look like if you were to renovate it, if you were to change it. And so some of these pictures, on the left you see what the room actually looks like, and then you had the ability on the right to see, what if I painted the walls? What if I replaced the appliances? What if we moved the furniture? What would it look like? And they could slide the pictures back and forth, and take a look and try to identify how the home that exists today might be more valuable for them. And we did that using early generative AI, specifically around the generation of new imagery based on the existing imagery of the home. That allowed buyers to actually derive more value from the homes that were on the market. You know, I've lived in a number of homes in my life. I've been married for a number of years, and my wife and I have, as we've selected homes, often thought about where our family is in the ages of our kids and our stage in life, and how we might use that home. And at times, we've moved into a home where the prior owners were in a very different spot in their life. We bought a home a few years ago where the owners were a generation older than us, and their kids had moved out of the house. They were using the home very differently than how we wanted to use the home. But what we did, we didn't have compass lens back then, is when we got to the home, we talked about it. We said, hey, what if we put the bed over here, and the toys over here, and the piano over here? And we made it work for us. Using artificial intelligence, we were able to do that on the search site. So when you're searching for all the homes, you could do that very quickly. You don't have to go visit the home and look at it and do all that work yourself. On the side of selling the home, one of the things that we identified was that many times someone has been living in a home for a number of years, and if you use artificial intelligence to aggregate data about the location of that home, the community that that home lives in, the market changes that have been occurring, and you take that information and you develop a perspective on the potential price of a home that this person just lives there. They're not looking to sell the home. They haven't said that they want to sell the home. But what you can do is you can approach them and say to them, based on what we understand about your home and about what the market is doing, and by the way, in the US, it's very common to have a loan called a mortgage and have money that you have put into the home and money that you owe a bank for the home. And you can understand how the economics would work out for that individual, and also present to them a case for how, if they sold their home, they could actually use the profit to move into another home, perhaps in the same neighborhood, that would meet their life's needs in a much better way. And many people don't think about their homes like that. They only think about moving when there's a need to move. Maybe they have more kids. Maybe their job has changed. Maybe they have some preferences that have changed. And what we were able to do is inform our real estate agents about home owners who might be likely to sell. So we'd give them recommendations saying, this is a homeowner. That homeowner, maybe you should ring their doorbell and give them this information. And they might not even realize they're sitting on top of a huge asset. That home could get them a significant profit that they can use in another home. So in both of these cases, on the buy side and the sell side, we used artificial intelligence to ensure that we were getting the highest value for the asset, in this case, the home. And it's important to note in this particular case, much like the clothing scenario I described, the value of the asset was very precisely related to the individuals who would derive the most value from it. A home might be worth a certain amount of money to one family and might be worth a lot more money to another family because of how it meets their needs. And we were able to identify that. And so again, you have a scenario here where artificial intelligence actually generated economic opportunity for buyers and sellers of homes through the generation of imagery and recommendations around how to understand the overall real estate market. So Clearco. Clearco was a fascinating learning for myself. We started the process at Clearco of providing working capital to founders of businesses. And what we thought was that if we created a data-driven way to underwrite loan applications that were coming in, we would simply automate a process that existed. In other words, typically if you go to a bank and you're asking them for a loan for your business, you have to provide a bunch of paperwork, some financial records, you have to explain what your assets are, what your liabilities are, and then someone at the bank has to read that paperwork and decide what they want to do. And what we thought was, let's build a system that aggregates all of the data you see here, data from their marketplace if they're an e-commerce company, from their payment processor if they're collecting money, from their banking and accounting systems which understand how much money they have, from public sources that understand whether they're part of a sanctioned group or whether they have any risk of money laundering, and then from marketing platforms which helps you understand what type of return on investment you're getting from that business. So we thought, okay, if we pull all of this data, we'll have 10x or more data than what a typical bank has, and we'll be able to do a better job underwriting. And that was correct. And we had people applying to us for capital for their business, and very quickly, within minutes, we were able to take data from all the systems that they used. Remember, all of these systems have APIs that you can use to get data and put them into a database for analysis through the AI, and we were able to administer these loans. What we didn't appreciate was that the AI would actually identify opportunities where the businesses were not even asking for money, but where it was a great opportunity for us to deploy capital with a great chance of that capital being paid back with fees, and with the business having an opportunity to actually use that capital to grow their business. We identified opportunities where a company was selling their product in one region, and because we knew what marketing they were doing, and because we knew what types of products were selling fast and what types of products were not, we could actually tell them, you know, if you paid more for marketing in a different region, you might be able to make more money. And they didn't even realize this. And so we would go to them and we would say, can we please give you a loan? Instead of them coming to us and saying, can I have a loan? Which we didn't expect at all, but the AI told us that. And so again, it's another example of being able to use AI to deploy capital where it could be best applied, and also take a constraint of having to go through that loan application and instead turn it into a driver of growth. Because if they give us all this data, we can actually create more opportunities than existed before. And so finally, I'll tell you about Atria. Atria is an organization that is designed to deliver healthcare in the way that patients want and in the way that doctors want to provide it. And so what that means is that we provide proactive preventative care based on the latest science. So when the science has told us that certain diagnostics will actually help identify risks of disease earlier than waiting for symptoms to arise, we actually go and collect those diagnostics, have a medical team who understands how to leverage those diagnostics, and then we work with them to actually deliver that preventative care to our patients. We also work in a team-based approach. If you talk to any one of us, anyone who's been through a complex medical procedure, they'll tell you, well, I had to go to this doctor and they referred me to this doctor and then they asked me to go to this doctor, and every time it was 1 week wait, 2 week wait, and then when I went to this doctor, I wasn't sure if they had talked to this doctor and I had to share the information and so on and so forth. And so it's very hard for a patient to feel like they have a team of doctors who are all working together to actually understand what's happening with them and come to a collective decision on what's best for treatment. If you ask the doctors, they would say, I would love to do this. This is exactly what I would like to do. I just wish I had time, and I wish I had the money to be able to do this. And so what we've done is we've used artificial intelligence in a number of different areas, but I'll talk about two. Number one, in taking all of the different types of data that we get, you see here some examples. You see, this is all me going through my own health assessment. Up at the top, getting some imagery of my chest, looking at a calcium score of my heart. Here you see me doing some movement. I'm not an athlete, but in this case they asked me to throw a ball and kick a ball so they could analyze my bone structure and how I was moving. On the right you see tests of my cognitive performance using what's known as an EEG to assess how I work when I think through different mathematical and functional areas. And then over here you see a hearing and vision test, which is used to identify not only hearing and vision, but also signals of cognitive function. And so we took all of this data, which our doctors have said, look, I love that you're getting all this data, but I don't have time to look at it. I don't have time to process it. And we used AI to help aggregate it, identify the correlation between the data, identify what risk factors the science actually tells us we should present to the doctor. And we also found that what our doctors said to us was, typically there are industry standards for things like what should your cholesterol be, what should your, at a given age, what type of range of motion should you have. But those things, if you take the time to think about an individual patient, might actually be personalized to that patient. And we developed a lot of those metrics. And by doing that, we actually have found that we can do the preventative work, which improves the health span, and actually at a lower cost, because we are giving the doctors a lot more observability on the human body, and also through the connection, through the data platform and the connection to all of our doctors in our team, we can allow those doctors to collaborate on the data set in real time instead of having to do multiple visits on the same patient. And so again, it's an opportunity to take a constraint around the need to access multiple specialists and turn it into an opportunity to have team-based care create additional value for the patient. And so as I finish up, I'll tell you about building markets, which is an opportunity that we have here in Colombia, that we have in Latin America, that we have, globally. I was in Turkey a month and a half ago with the building markets team, looking at some of the same things that we've been talking about here in Colombia. And what we're talking about is basically an environment where there are phenomenal entrepreneurs who have great talent, who have access to great natural resources and great partners, and just need the opportunity to have the capital to grow their business, and also have the skills and training to understand how to best optimize their business. And finally, have the ability to connect with buyers of their products. And artificial intelligence, as you can imagine, has an opportunity in each one of those steps to actually generate the information necessary to be able to create those connections, to be able to create that information. And so what I want to leave you with is, if you think about all of the stories, and thank you for sitting through all of those stories with me. Hopefully you find some of them interesting. The patterns are pretty similar. You have AI that's able to generate value from assets that exist. You have AI that's able to identify opportunities to deploy capital. And you have AI that can transform constraints into economic drivers. So thank you very much, and I'd love to hear any questions that you have now. All right. Are we done? All right. We've got, should I take it or? Okay, we've got one question here.
In the case of a study of Compass that you explained, were you able to value the increase of sales or buys in homes with this AI feature that you apply?
We did. We had the full loop. We understood when it sold and we understood when it didn't sell.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, for different kind of projects, what do you recommend to us to face different problems in order to identify opportunities to implement AI in sort of different ways?
I think the way to look at it is think about the core assets within the environment you're operating in and what value you're trying to derive. Don't think about the AI yet. Don't think about the workflows that you want to automate. Think even more big picture about what is it within the industry that you're working in that you're actually trying to improve, and then contemplate what would the world look like if you had infinite time and infinite resources to actually extract that value, and then use AI to make it so that you don't need infinite time and resources to actually deliver that value. All right.
One of the things that I thank you for the thank you about your exposition. One of the things that worries me about AI is that, not worries me, that one of the topics I think is changing about AI is that you talk about taking data and transform it into insights, right, and act on it. I understand that this new generation of the generative AI that came with the LLMs and all that stuff, do you think there is an extra take that we have to take into account?
Are you asking if there's extra for safety and for those types? I think there's a tremendous amount of things that we have to do to ensure that the data is accurate, to ensure that the algorithms are as unbiased as necessary, and that the automation that occurs as a result of what's being generated is protected with the appropriate safety guardrails. But all of that is dependent on the domain. So if you ask me, in the previous talk we saw a website being generated. For that, the safety is not that big a deal. On the other hand, if you're using AI to make a medical decision, the safety is a very big deal. So I think you have to consider all of that, but in the context of the domain that you're operating in. All right? Are we finished up? All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hemos finalizado nuestro encuentro en este momento. Pero hey, no te quedes con toda la información. Compártela con el mundo en redes sociales utilizando el hashtag Col40. Y recuerda, esto es Colombia 4.0. Ya haces parte de la era de la inteligencia artificial.